action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, business and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Susan Coghill, a proper marketer getting travellers to track a trail to the land of kangaroos and Kylie. Susan is currently CMO of Tourism Australia and a peddler of the power of creativity to build brands, drive business and shape culture. Recently, she's navigated tourism in Oz through tough times, made a 9-minute film while everyone else was making TikToks, and brought souvenir kangaroo Ruby to life in their top-performing Come and Say G'day campaign. Despite worrying that it might seem trite, research showed that people around the world still love a bouncing marsupial. Susan says, "We did 6 months of research, and yes, the answer was a kangaroo. There's a reason we have a kangaroo as our logo. There's a reason that Qantas uses a kangaroo in its logo." I'm feeling very lucky to welcome to the show, Susan.
Oh, Giles, thank you for that warm welcome, and thank you for having me here today. It's really great to be on the show.
Oh, no, the pleasure's entirely mine. Susan, 7 quick fires.
Yes.
Singapore or Sydney?
Oh, Sydney, all the time.
Agency or client side?
Gosh, that's a hard one.
Careful.
I've got to say client side, but I'm always an agency girl at heart.
Long or short?
Oh, definitely long.
Vacation or staycation?
Vacation.
These are too easy, right? Chris Hemsworth or Kylie Minogue?
Kylie. You've got to love Kylie.
Yeah, is the correct answer. Right, 2 more. Ruby Rose or Ruby Roo?
Ruby Roo, Ruby the souvenir kangaroo. Absolutely. She's our new mascot, and I love her.
Amazing. Right, last one, and there's always at least one ridiculous one. Can Lions or Cairns Crocs?
Canned Lions. I'm afraid of Crocs.
Awesome. Amazing. Listen, Susan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We always ask every guest about their path to where they are now. So can you tell our listeners, what was your first ever job? And then what was your first proper marketing / brand job?
Sure. My very first job ever when I was, I think, 15 years old, working in Angelo's Pizza in Florissant, Missouri, where I grew up. And I think I lasted all of about 2 or 3 months, was the extent of my hospitality experience. I quickly found a job after that working in a retirement home, answering phones a few nights a week for $5 an hour, and found the best job ever because I would sit and talk to all the older people in the home and kept them company in the evening and did my homework. So I think I'm suited to those jobs where I'm interacting with people and I'm chatting and telling stories.
Nice. How long did you do that for?
Oh, I did that for I think a couple of years in high school before I went away to university in California.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I was reading a few years ago, I'm not sure how common practice it is now, but I believe it was a company based in Holland, and they were somehow twinning retirement homes with student accommodation.
Oh, yes, I read that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic.
It's a great idea. I mean, I think that sort of intergenerational experience, cross-pollination, I guess, of people of all ages is a really great thing. And yeah, I just love learning from their wisdom and their experience. In my personal life, I lost my parents quite young. I lost my mother when I was 1.5 years, and my father passed away when I was 11. And I think, so I was raised by my older sisters, who are amazing, absolute stars in their own right. But I think going in and working in the old folks' home, the retirement home that I was in, gave me a connection to an older generation that I didn't have in my own personal life growing up, to be quite honest. So yeah, I got a lot out of that.
Yeah, no doubt. Oh, wonderful. I'm sure they did too. And then at what stage did you start thinking about your career beyond that? You said you were at high school. Was that something that you had a clear path for already in your head, or was it something that you just kind of discovered a bit later?
No, look, I knew I wanted to go to university. I wanted to get my degree. I wanted to work professionally. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I mean, I think I had a whole range of aspirations when I was a kid. I wanted to be an archaeologist for a long time, which I'm pretty sure was inspired by the movies of the time, by
some Indiana Jones films.
Indiana Jones, yeah, exactly. I think for a while I thought I wanted to go to law school. And I think I thought about going into sports medicine at one point. I was a competitive soccer player in grade school, high school, and university. But look, I found my way into advertising first, working in agencies, because my sister worked in advertising agencies in Los Angeles. And she encouraged me to look for opportunities. She thought, my personality, my skill set, my personal interests would be a good fit. And that's where I started. I got my first job in advertising in an agency called GBF Air, which was the West Coast outpost of NW Air, a very long-standing agency. I don't know that it even exists anymore, but at the time it had been around for, 100 years or something like that. And that's where I sort of started learning the ropes of account management. Spent a couple of years there before I went to Team One. Team One was the agency that was created by Saatchi & Saatchi for the Lexus brand when they launched the luxury range of Lexus in America. Although I did not work on Lexus, I worked on America West Airlines. So I think that's when I started my career, I suppose, in travel and tourism, really. America West was interesting because it was neither the cheap Southwest airline type of service, and it wasn't the expensive full service airline. So trying to carve out a niche sort of in the middle. So I spent, I think, 3 years or so working on the airline there before some former Team One colleagues had gone to TBWA Chiat Day at the time to work on the Apple account. And they recruited me, brought me over. And this was in 1997, which totally dates me. And I appreciate that some of your listeners would not even be alive at that stage. But nonetheless, it was a real historical moment in the world of marketing and advertising to be working on the Apple brand. And at that time when Steve Jobs just went back to Apple, and, we were on the cusp of launching the Think Different campaign, and not long after that, launching the iMac and really changing the world forever, both in terms of, computers, but in terms of branding and advertising, etc. It was a pretty amazing time to be at Chiat Day.
It's probably one of the most referenced campaigns, I think, in most people's career, regardless of whether they were alive in 97 or not. So, and I wonder, because everybody has like a perception of why it was so fantastic, and we all know that that's so easy to do retrospectively because there's so much context and market orientation issues and things that just you can't suffer in hindsight. And I wonder what it was like from your perspective. Yeah, in terms of being so heavily involved. Did it feel like it was going to be that significant at the time?
Yeah, honestly, it really did. It was a real. You could feel how important it was, how important that moment was, and you could feel that we were making history. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I was a junior burger. I was a little, assistant account executive, I think. Yeah. Or account executive, I can't remember. So I was. I was young and green and impressionable, and it has certainly shaped the marketer that I have become. But, at that point in time, as I said, Steve Jobs had just gone back to the business. He was on the cover of Time magazine, Newsweek magazine, which back then, obviously, all of this was huge, and they were proper printed magazines that were, delivered to, tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of houses around America at the time. He was just a real cultural icon, and you could feel that it was on a mission. He was not going to let his baby fail, and despite the fact, everybody knows the story, right? That the business was a mess, the supply chain was a mess, the finances were a mess, etc. And that Think Different campaign was so essential to rebuilding people's trust in the brand, and keeping the faithful Apple believers on board until such time that they could start to ship new product. But also it was breathing new life into the Apple brand. And to do it in such a wonderfully emotive way was incredible. And it is interesting because, as you say, was a campaign that is, probably the most referenced across our industry. And I find that fascinating because there's not many brands or businesses that can live up to that type of storytelling, that beautiful manifesto type of a campaign. It takes a lot of guts, but it takes a certain type of business to be able to do that, And I still, think that there's probably a lot of executions, a lot of campaigns out there that try and live up to it, but don't,
Yeah.
And just, the importance of really knowing who your brand is and how you tell your story is incredibly important, and not just trying to emulate what Apple has done, for example. But yeah, it was an incredible moment. I worked on the very last beige computer promotion as well. We had like a 12-page insert that was getting stuck into, again, a Time or Newsweek magazine for the G3 Tower, I think it was. And in my second week of work, I was nominated as the junior person who was, dispensable, I guess, to carry some work to Hawaii to Steve. I guess I was going to be a safe pair of hands while everybody else kept working back at home. So I get to his resort, I walk in the front door, and I kind of, I don't know what I am. I'm 24 or 25 or something. I'm like kind of basically whisper to the receptionist, "There's Steve Jobs," and he comes around the corner and he looks at me and he puts his arms out. He's like, "You must be Susan. Come on, let's go look at the work." And that, I'm like, okay, so we go out to the beach, we sit under a pavilion and we lay out the mocked up, 12-page insert or so, whatever it was. We start going through the work, and he's asking my opinion on it. And again, here I am, this little junior burger, giving him my opinion on this stuff and just thinking, what is happening right now? How did I get here? And it was incredible to be sitting with, again, this incredible titan of business, this man who really was changing the world. And he's sitting there asking my opinion on things, It was a real incredible moment.
Yeah, it's. I tell you what's like kind of only now I'm thinking that this was when you were in your early 20s. I think you suggested.
Yes.
I wonder, given not only did you have exposure to such a fantastically successful builder of brands, and you were so involved in one of the most referenced, amazingly effective campaigns of all time, and yet at some point in your career you decided to move sides and go client side, whereas your version of agency side must have just been like beyond most people's experience at that age. So I will get on to that, but before I ask you about moving client side, how did you initially find your role as an account manager? The reason I ask that is we've had so many guests in the past, and I think I've joked that account management is almost like the kind of gateway drug into agency land, because so many people typically start there. And certainly when it comes to previous guests of Call to Action, many people realise they're a different shaped person to the one that needs to be to succeed in that role, and they end up going and becoming planners or strategists or even into creative departments. But did it feel really good to you when you first started that role, or did you kind of explore other roles within the agency?
No, do you know what? No, it felt really good for me. It was a great fit, and I really loved my time in account management in agency land, and I worked at some really great agencies over the years, whether it was Shy Day there, BBH in Singapore, my time at Publicist Mojo, or Campaign Palace here in Sydney, highly creative agencies, work hard, often work hard, play hard, but, it's all about the work and driving results. I've never fancied myself a planner, although I've always, I've had great respect, I guess, for that skill set and for the people that excel at that. Definitely never fancied myself a creative, but like to think of myself as a creative enabler, someone who helps make all of that happen. And look, there's probably something that goes back to that early job working at the retirement home, having conversations with lots of different people, trying to learn new things and absorb as much as I can. And I think that probably, is why I was set up for success, I guess, in the account management role. But no, I never really looked at other jobs wishing that I was doing those. I just enjoyed learning a little bit about each part of the business and helping really move the relationship with the client forward to hopefully the best results I could.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no reason also I should stress why you should think you needed to look at other roles. I think most people consistently agree that a great account manager or client partner, however, whatever label you give to those amazing people is worth their weight in gold.
Absolutely.
I mean, they really are.
They're priceless. And don't get me wrong, it's hard yakka for sure. It's definitely hard work, but yeah, it's still incredibly rewarding. And I think it has set me up for success on the client side because, you have to be a bit more of a generalist as you get more senior as a client. You need that skill set of being able to learn from different departments or learn from different industries and be able to apply it broadly.
Yeah, well said. And do you think, I appreciate it might feel like I'm spoon feeding you the answer I want to hear now, which I don't mean to, but do you think your time agency side did give you that kind of understand, or that
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
you said you called yourself an enabler of creativity? Do you think that's something that you took into client side that perhaps is less common, or is that an unfair kind of suggestion?
No, 100%. And I've talked about that often, that having that agency grounding, well, look, it brings a few things. One, I think agency people are incredibly hardworking. We're resourceful. I think agency people are entrepreneurial. We look to solve problems, as well as being, creative and very outcome driven. And I think all of those things set me up for for success when I moved client side, not least of which because I could code switch between, working with agencies, all over different types of agencies, be it creative, media, digital, or whatever. And then and I learned, the language of the more corporate world, of the client side world, and I think I carved a niche out for myself in my client side jobs by being able to do that and by being able to get good work through and be able to explain. And I think, probably do it, sometimes, depending on the business, that the client is in, you can have a degree of cynicism sometimes about marketing, within sort of executive suites or within the broader business. And by having somebody internally, who can explain the process, who can demystify the approach or decode the creative in a way that is more relevant or more clear in that environment can really help. And also just building the relationships with our agencies. I greatly value how we work with agencies. I've got a team that's pretty well stacked with ex-agency people as well. And I think that I like to think we end up getting, better work, and we all work harder together towards a shared ambition for the type of advertising that we want to produce.
I was going to say for kind of balance, what you find more commonly client side than agency side, because I did, as I said, spoon feed you the idea that perhaps creativity is one that came from agency side. You did touch on a few there, and you use words like there's a kind of natural cynicism. I personally don't think that's, I think it's fair that there's a natural cynicism. And I almost think that lots of agencies, although of course not all, have kind of allowed themselves to be seen as a bit fluffy at times, or, for want of a better word. And I think that I have certainly noticed in our time of running Gasp for 14 years the significance of speaking the right language, in the right boardrooms and executive corridors, and understanding the value of creativity. Is it fair to say that client side, there's also a greater understanding of market orientation?
Yes, I think so, but I also think that's changing. I think with the likes of Marketing Week's mini MBA with Mark Ritson, with things like, sections, training programs, all that sort of stuff, I think there's a much greater ability and awareness, I guess, of what clients go through to drive commercial outcomes, and that it is creativity in service of commercial outcomes, creativity in service of, the business. But yeah, look, I think there's always a risk of that, certainly, when you're putting, really talented creative minds to work, that maybe that they can get caught up in an idea. But again, with great strategy people, great account people, and collaborating with a good client, I think that harnessing that energy, is that's where the magic happens, And look, I appreciate your point around the cynicism that or my point earlier, about the cynicism that you can sometimes encounter, within the halls at a client's office. But and I think that's sometimes a bit of the healthy debate, isn't it? That,
yes, yeah.
Maybe we can ask the tougher, harder edge questions, and the agency can help us aspire and to reach for greater heights and do more and be more creative and stand out more. I think that healthy tension between those two partners is really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, it's more up to the the person fielding that question right, or fielding that cynicism, and being able to convince that there is value and logic behind what they're presenting. I gave a talk a couple of nights ago to a university, and I was talking about that precise conversation. I think that conversation is certainly, or seemingly, easier to have nowadays because there is so much empirical data available to us, and you could point towards, certainly, I think Mark Ritson deserves another name drop, but also the likes of Ehrenberg Bass and the LinkedIn B2B Institute and, Burnett and Field, wherever you are. And I think that understanding of what Mark would call bothism, or long and short, or, future demand or future sales and whatever it is becoming much easier to kind of explain.
Yes.
To allow creativity to flourish. But look, that's something that you certainly managed recently with your G'day campaign.
Yes, thank you.
I appreciate that you've spoken about this at length, so I don't need you to kind of revisit it in, any significant capacity. But what was it like? What was I think people don't necessarily understand, or might not think about the real context of what you were doing with that campaign, because not only had the pandemic just completely knocked out the tourism industry of sorts.
Absolutely. Yes.
But also you had that period, and I say this as you now know, of someone who has lots of family in Australia. There's not only the fact that the pandemic affected tourism, there's also what we know from the likes of people I was mentioning before, Burnett and Field, etc., that you need to refresh people's memories.
Yes.
Don't you? It's not just a case of you don't stop advertising it just because people aren't able to travel or able to purchase.
That's right.
So
yeah.
Can you explain a bit more about the context and how you ended up with the campaign that you did? Because it was a brilliant campaign and it was so effective. And
thank you. I appreciate your very kind words. But look, what I'd say, it's funny, people often say to me, they said to me during the pandemic or just after, like, geez, things must have been quiet for you during that period. And can I tell you, I have never worked so hard in my entire life as I did through those few years of the pandemic. And you have to remember that we, firstly, we, going into the pandemic, just before the pandemic, rather, we had the bushfires in Australia.
Of course.
Which were also devastating at the time. And the perception around the world was that, so much of Australia, that the eastern seaboard plus was really on fire and in ashes, and it really wasn't. So we were working hard to combat that image around the world. And don't get me wrong, the bushfires were awful and devastating, and we're still recovering in parts of the country from that. So I don't want to minimize, I suppose, what happened, but I also just need to look at it in the larger context. We were having people canceling flights to come to Australia because the perception was it was much worse and much wider spread than it had been. So, and we had just launched our campaign in the UK with Kylie Minogue, with the Mate song, that we had spent such a long time preparing. And, we were ready to welcome Brits back to Australia in a post-Brexit world, remind the UK that that you've got this, cousin down under who still loves you and wanted to welcome you. So, we had come off a long period working on that. We leaned into trying to drive domestic tourism during the bushfires and trying to rebuild international tourism. And then the pandemic took off. And then within the pandemic, at first it was the international borders closing and we weren't able to welcome anybody to our shores. And then we started having our state border closures within the country as well, which meant that our domestic tourism industry then was devastated even further. So we pivoted at that time to focus on domestic advertising, trying to encourage Australians to travel here within our borders the same way they do overseas. And there's just a real truism that the further that you go on your holiday, the more special it is. So if you go for a weekend away, you probably don't spend that much money, and you probably just stay at an Airbnb or a little hotel, and you maybe don't do any experiences and maybe you don't go out to eat. But then compare that to a European holiday, or for you, a holiday in America, say. You are going to invest in a better hotel. You're going to invest in a tour of, I don't know, Yankee Stadium or something. I don't know. You're going to go for special experiences that, book that nice restaurant in New York. And that's what we needed Australians to do, to go further, stay longer, do more experiences, spend more. So we focused on that. We spun one team up to focus on our domestic activity. We had a campaign running called Holiday Here This Year, and it was all about getting out, enjoying your own backyard and supporting the industry. Which was really successful. We actually won. We got a silver Effie for that, which is the only Effie awarded in tourism and travel in Australia, and I think over a 2 or 3 year period. So I'm very proud of that. But behind the scenes, one, we were still developing content to run in our markets around the world to keep Australia as top of mind as we could, to keep them engaged. We ran a live streaming 48-hour event, coast to coast, live streaming tourism experiences and other content called Live from Oz. Again, just to keep the focus on our operators and the Australian lifestyle and all the wonderful aspirational pieces that the world knows and loves. We were developing 8D audio films to put out for people to experience a little bit of Australia from their homes. And amongst other things, we're continuing social media marketing, et cetera. We just knew that we couldn't go dark. We couldn't risk, we didn't know how long it was going to go for, and we couldn't risk completely falling off the map, so to speak. And then at the same time, though, we wanted to make sure that we set ourselves up for success in developing our brand campaign that would, eventually, we knew the borders would open. And we knew that we needed to understand our consumers better than we ever did before. So we undertook a whole raft of research and analysis that I think is pretty unprecedented in the travel or in the tourism category, rather. We sort of borrowed frameworks and approaches from other categories, so we did full funnel analysis for ourselves in each of our markets and for our competitors. We looked at drivers of demand, again, across each of our countries, each of our markets. We did our brand code research in each of our markets as well. So what are those shortcuts and the shorthands for Australia that we could tap into to ensure that once we go back to market, people recognize our communications? Because one of the challenges in destination marketing is that sea of sameness, and misattribution is so easy when people are just substituting, there's a beach in this ad, or there's food and wine or that. The montage approach to storytelling in travel and tourism is really rife. So we wanted to make sure that once we go back and launch, that we are distinctly and uniquely Australian. But we also we were mindful that we had been shut for 2 years. And we wanted to make sure that we had a proposition and ultimately an execution that brought the warm and welcoming nature of Australians to the fore, And we actually looked backwards. We looked at the old Paul Hogan campaign from the 80s,
Yes.
Come and Say Good Day campaign, the shrimp and the Barbie for America. But that line, he used that line in it, inviting Americans to come down and say good day. And it's such a wonderfully warm, charming Australian line that we knew that we could breathe new life into that in a new way. And there's so many other parts of the research and so much other work that we did. Like we started looking at how do we aim for attentive reach in our media planning. So how do we, stop using less effective channels where people aren't engaging with our content? We were doing white space analysis to understand what are the opportunities for us to stand out versus our competition. What are the experiences that we're famous for versus the things that we have an opportunity to build, et cetera. So a whole raft of work that went into of inputs, I guess, into the development of this new campaign. So I like to say I'm as proud of the smarts behind this campaign as I am of the creative and the results that we're now seeing.
Yeah, you really should be. And I think I'm saying this on behalf of everyone listening. There's so many things in what you just said, which I've scribbled down to highlight here. So not only was
I hope I wasn't too rambly there.
No, I don't. No, not at all. Not at all. It was the ratio of smarts to time was high. The fact you talked about needing to research because, of course, your kind of consumers, your target segments, their attitudes had changed significantly. So the fact you even did that, I think, is significant. Although to you, you'll think that's obvious because I wish it was obvious. You talked about the brand codes and the fact that they're kind of shortcuts in people's minds, which again is just such a great point that we often try and make ourselves. But you did it so well articulated. And just your appreciation of use of brand codes, whether that's in language and good day, being such a nice, warm, affectionate, simple 4-letter word, and everything about what came out of the campaign was exactly, and to use your words, distinctly and uniquely Australian, is perfect. And one of my pet hates in in this industry is the amount of subjectivity in people's responses to advertising. And it's not to say I don't think consumers have a right to subjectively like a campaign or not, because, you know, there's lots of logic about liking something that then helps something become famous. And of course, fame is a significant thing and an objective to aim for in its own right. But it's more the fact that everything about this shows that it's work that works. And we know the campaign worked. And I think there were people in the industry who didn't receive the campaign particularly warmly, who completely missed the market orientation point and completely missed the fact that those are the codes that were working, and you needed to have something that wasn't going to be confused for any other destination. Like, it just worked so well.
Yeah, look, I think there was a little bit of confusion early on because we did a bit of a soft launch in Japan maybe 10 days before we did the full campaign launch and the short film launch in the US, in New York. So, you know, we wanted a balanced approach to, you know, we wanted to have an event in Asia as well as an event in one of our Western markets. Japan was a key market, you know, in our reopening. We used that as an opportunity to launch the character, announce our partnership with Rose Byrne. We talked about the Japanese talent that we were using to voice the character as well, Mary June Takahashi. And there were, I think, there were a few, not that many, but there were a few probably vocal marketing industry people here that maybe missed the point that wasn't the entire campaign. It was always going to be more than just a kangaroo knocking on a window of a billboard. And I think once the whole full campaign revealed itself, people understood really well the length of the breadth, I guess, of the story and the narrative. But you know what? Look, it's easy. I think there's high interest within Australia around how we portray the country. We've got 27 million stakeholders here. The population of Australia certainly, and we've got a very very active marketing press down here, and it's just something that we have to roll with. It's important that we keep our eyes on the prize, which is getting our international visitors back here to Australia. And look, between you and me, when we did our testing, between you and me and your listeners, by the way. But when we did our testing internationally, which I've spoken before, we use System 1 testing, and it helps us greatly to understand how we're connecting. It lets us talk to consumers at scale in market and understand how they're receiving it. So we researched it in, I can't remember, 10 or 11 markets or so. But I did test it in Australia as well. I wanted to understand how everyday Australians responded to it, not just how say marketing media or breakfast TV might respond to it. And it scored as high in Australia as it did in our other markets. So that gives me real confidence. And also when I saw Australians' comments on social media about the ad, I knew that we were on to a winner, and I knew that we landed it, regardless of, a few, loud pundits. And what I would also say is, here we are nearly 1 year on since launch, and we have tested the ad again. I put it back into System 1, and we're still getting 4s and 5 stars. So I'm confident in the idea. I'm confident in Ruby and Come and Say Good Day as a creative platform, as a message to the world to welcome people back. And in fact, we also did an execution for the Women's World Cup as well. So we took Ruby and her statue emu character as well, and we made them sportscasters, doing voiceover to, or giving highlights, holiday highlights in the same vein as you would match highlights, and it was fantastic. It was viewed about 70 million times in our key markets, and the reception to it was really strong.
Amazing.
So we're really happy with the direction that we're going in. We do aim for the assets to be able to run. We built the business case around it for it to run, for 2 to 3 years. We'll still be doing those creative extensions like we did for the Women's World Cup when we launched in China in June, because of course they opened later than the rest of the world. We did some customized animation specifically for China. We had sort of hand gestures like heart hands and heart fingers and stuff like that, which is really important for us to take something that, yes, it's global, but we are able to take it and customize it, in key markets and make it feel relevant, show a little bit of respect to the local market and the local consumers as well. That was really an important part of the campaign as well.
And in case you were too modest to say, your ad actually tested in or scored in the top 0.1% of ad creative with System 1.
Indeed, it really did. Yeah, and we're still up there. I'm super proud of that. And actually, let me tell you something else that we've done is understanding how the campaign works against other segments as well. So we've just undertaken some testing in the U.S. With consumers, 350,000 USD plus a year, so quite high income. Took us a while to find them and get them to participate.
Of course.
But to be honest, the score that was 5.9 stars, and our brand fluency was even higher. So I'm extremely confident that a campaign that we developed to run broadcast, for what we talk about our high yielding audience, it's not necessarily ultra high net worth, but it's a high yielding audience who prioritize travel. So they come down and spend more than other travelers. Yes, the original testing showed it worked well with them, but the fact that we can now test it still 1 year later against, very high income Americans, and it's testing even better. Again, it just gives me great confidence in the direction that we've gone.
Yeah, I think people are too eager to talk about wear out, but this is still wearing in by the sounds of it, which is wonderful.
100%, and again, the importance of being distinctly Australian. And, look, we made sure that we layered in the right brand codes, but I like to think, I hope anyway, that we also kept enough room for the magic of the storytelling so that it would be engaging and entertaining across the breadth of the campaign as well. And I think, the more chapters that we can build with this, hopefully these characters will continue to evolve, and people will get to know them, and we'll see different sides of them and have fun. In the way that we've seen with, say, the M&Ms over the years, or the Geico geckos over the years, or the Energizer bunny lives for a long time. I'm sure that it's there's so much opportunity and growth that we can still squeeze from this.
Well, another line I've pulled out from you in our research is you said we don't have enough budget to be boring. So I think you've achieved exactly that. And I think if Paul Feldwick's listening, they'll certainly give him a grin to hear that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We just are not one of those brands that can throw money at a mediocre execution. We have to make sure that we're standing out. And the other thing is we really have to squeeze every ounce of messaging or PR opportunity that we can out of every idea. And that's why when you talk about this campaign being layered, like, we really thought through everything. So, so the role, with the animation, or the director who we chose to help us tell the story was Michael Gracie, who was the director of The Greatest Showman. He's this incredible director, started his career in animation and special effects, became a commercial director, very, very successful commercial director, became a feature director with The Greatest Showman, and did an amazing job with that. And we were lucky to get him after that to come help us tell our story and do our short film. The animator that he brought on to design the characters also designed Peter Rabbit. The choice to use Down Under, so that iconic Men at Work track, and we debated a lot whether we use the original one that everyone knows or do we reinterpret. In the end, we went for a reinterpretation because we felt a fresh take on it was important. But this young up-and-coming band, King Stingray, who's just having a bit of a moment themselves, that was a whole nother direction for us to talk about great Indigenous music and Indigenous storytelling, for example. Anyway, I could keep going on about, as you said, the language with G'day. We built all these things in, but I'm hoping that it feels more charming and more composed than heavy-handed. And I'm hoping that it just continues to, give us great creative, or lay a great creative groundwork for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Time, weather, and...
We interrupt this podcast to announce that we will never interrupt this podcast with ads. Ads that awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host, Giles Edwards, at giles@gasp.agency. Only the other day, some pod listening companies did just that, calling for guidance on research and brand identity. But we're definitely not asking you to do that. Anyway, back to the show.
My first sort of proper paid weekly job was a holiday job as a student
which was driving a forklift truck at the Ribena factory in Culford, Gloucestershire.
Call to action, episode 11, with the one and only Rory Sutherland. Not what we were looking for, but hang on a minute.
I'm mindful that
go.
it's your Friday evening where you are, so and I promise not to keep you too long. So I'm going to move to listener questions, also in part because they both kind of nod to this campaign. So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. I'm going to put two to you, Susan, starting with Jenny. This is a great question. Jenny asks, is marketing orientation easier or harder given your largest customer segment presumably resides outside of Australia, leaving you physically so far away from them already?
I would say that the principles of market orientation are 100% the same. But yes, you have to multiply that times 15 markets. And the challenge for us, however, is to understand the nuance between markets, but also not let us fall into the trap of saying, oh, but we're different. Oh, but we're different. Like I'm constantly encouraging us to have a really balanced conversation with our team in Sydney, but our teams in market as well, to know when a difference is meaningful or a difference is trivial, and kind of understand where we can find commonalities across markets. And look, this applies to so much, whether it's the media development, whether it's the tone of what we create, sorry, not media development, media strategy development, whether it's the tone of the creative, whether it's down to the casting, whether it's down to, we've just announced a partnership with Dylan Alcott down here in Australia with a load of other iconic Australian brands as well, to increase the representation of people of all different types of disabilities or otherly able people, and how is that represented in our marketing around the world as well? And we've got to take input and direction on how we best do that. So, sorry, again, I'm getting a bit of a broad answer here, but what I would say is the foundation, the principles of market orientation remain the same, and they're so incredibly important. And I think you live and die by them. But doing it across 15 markets is sure, it increases the volume, but I don't know that it increases complexity necessarily.
Yeah, great answer. I like the fact you talk about finding commonality as well. If Samuel Brealey's listening, he'll love that. He talks about that all the time. It's really smart, Susan.
We're all special. We truly are. I say to all my countries, you're all special. You truly are, but equally there's a lot that we share.
Yeah. Well, it's just sensible. There's an efficiency when it comes to thinking as well about that. Otherwise, you can force segments, can't you, far too easily, and actually it doesn't make anyone's life any easier.
Yeah. And in fact, our core segment, high yielding travelers, there's a lot of universality around them, to be honest. Again, they prioritize travel. They tend to come down and stay for longer. They live for experiences, etc. And that's true across all markets.
Yes. Yeah, well said. The second question is from Steve. We've kind of touched on this already, but Steve asks, were the initial negative responses to the Good Day campaign tricky to navigate within your organisation, despite them being the minority and largely, if not entirely, irrelevant?
No. No. Look, nobody likes negative comments. I get wounded, of course, by any comment. But do you know what? We had done so much work on this. We really.
You knew it was right.
We're confident. We knew it was right. We had spoken to so many people. Look, before we launched the campaign, I did probably about 2 months worth of stakeholder management and outreach. We went, flew around to most of our states. We held briefings with industry operators, leaders of our industry. We got their input. We understood what was working for them. Each of those meetings, to be honest, just made me more and more confident because of the support that we got. People understood them. The number one question after I finished my presentation was, are you going to make Ruby, and are you going to sell her, and can we sell her?
Yeah.
We're not selling Ruby, but look, negative comments are always painful to hear, but we were super confident. We also knew that once the larger campaign would roll out, that any and all questions would be answered. And look, I guess you just kind of have to back yourself, And look, there's no doubt also that, as a national tourism body, again, as I said, 27 million stakeholders, a lot of scrutiny that we're under, I guess. And we've got our government stakeholders. We answer, to our industry. We try and deliver for our industry. Everybody wants to see us do well. And I just had to trust that we were moving in the right direction. And, time has shown that we have.
Yeah,
we have been.
Brilliant. There's a great quote actually from Mark Ritson. He wrote an article in kind of defense of the campaign to those minority. And there's a line here, where is it? Proper marketers pointed out that those who live in Australia weren't the market for an ad about a trip to Australia, that they should therefore practice the most venerated of marketing moves, shutting the fuck up and being market orientated. But
He's
stress
hilarious,
they're Mark's
isn't he?
words, not yours. But I applaud him for saying that, because it's so true. And I love the fact you talked about, having confidence in it, because you'd clearly done so much of the work, and so much of the diagnosis had been done. So it wasn't a case of liking. And anyway, liking, if you try and do something that everyone likes, you're going to end up with some form of beige, aren't you? And that's not going to move the dial at all.
Absolutely. And again, look, I also had the scores in my back pocket. I knew how, through our testing, we had spoken to thousands of consumers, and I also knew what everyday Australians thought of it. So sure, there's always going to be a vocal minority, people who, have knee-jerk reactions. Look, I think as an industry, we would do better at being, I think, probably more supportive and more constructive in building, but at the end of the day, I think the work and the results are speaking for itself.
Yeah, totally. Funny enough, I was talking to John Evans yesterday of System 1, and we were talking about there's a campaign here for the Great British Bake Off that's just started to run. And it's wonderful, and I know it's scoring very highly. It's something that they're openly sharing at System 1. And I made the point that I heard somebody outside of the ad industry talking about the ad the other day. And I just said to him, that's just, imagine that, right? Imagine that. Like, that should be our metric. We shouldn't be worried about.
Absolutely. 100%. And look, for me, I think that sort of like, are you moving culture? That is something that I got a taste of, again, very early in my career, working on Apple, or, I worked for a time at Qantas Airlines here, working on the Feels Like Home campaign and watching people's response here in Australia to that, their response at the time, to the kangaroo on the red tail of the plane was so highly emotive. And they're continuing to run that campaign, or variations on that campaign, they have for the last 10 years or so. And it feels really good, and that's when you know that you've made a difference. That's when you've kind of permeated the real world, I guess.
Yeah, totally. Well, testament to Apple, who obviously we touched on more earlier, that the first quickfire question for most guests is Mac or PC. It's so ingrained in our culture. I didn't ask you that because I felt it, as an ex-soccer player, it was a bit of a tap-in for you. So I left that
Absolutely.
So Susan, the final part of the interview is our 4 pertinent posers that we put to all of our guests. Number 1 is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
The advice I would give my younger self is to back yourself earlier. I think I underestimated myself. I didn't put myself forward at times for promotions. Even for the job that I'm in now, when the former CMO left, my first reaction was, oh God, someone's going to come in and want their own person. Are they going to keep me? And it wasn't until I sat down with my then CEO at the time, who asked me, are you going to throw your hat in the ring? And I just looked at him and I went, would you consider me? And I still remember his response, because it's very classic John O'Sullivan. He said, oh shit, yeah. And I was so taken aback. I still had to go back and think about it for a couple of weeks. And I thought, well, look, even if I am the underdog, I appreciate that he's saying that. I've got to at least try, And I kind of went from thinking, I used to say, no, I don't need to be best leading actress. I'm happy to be best supporting actress and be amazing at that and really drive that. I don't need to be, the one winning the Oscar statue, as a metaphor. And then I realized, actually, no, I can do this. I've been doing so much of this for so long anyway. And I wish I had that spirit in myself, that belief in myself, maybe a little bit earlier. So that's what I would say to any young person out there. Believe in yourself, back yourself, put yourself out there, and invest in yourself to become what you should be.
Awesome
advice.
You can be. Awesome advice. Number 2, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
I would banish our anonymous comments in our in our industry trade websites. I think that people should be standing behind their comments. I mean, this makes me sound like I'm incredibly sensitive to negative comments. I don't want to overplay that necessarily, but I want to encourage more constructive and supportive dialogue and debate in our industry, because I think, we all know that people, be it creatives or other agency people or clients, you put a little bit of your heart and soul into every project, and we should be trying to encourage people to do more, do better, take risks. I mean, I think sometimes also that people underestimate that the impact of that negativity can have on, the wider industry or businesses, that it can make them more scared to take risks and do the creative things that the very industry want them to do. So I would say, it's absolutely fine to criticize. Let's do it in a constructive and out in the open sort of way. So I say no more anonymous comments.
Yeah, well, I mean, if that makes you sensitive, I just hope everyone is sensitive then, because I don't think that does at all. I think that's just such a good answer. It's probably one of the best answers we've ever had, Susan, because there are so many anonymous comments out there, and they carry with them a real weight that actually does harm and does affect people. And as you say, whether it's just removing their confidence to take a risk in their next campaign, it also hurts on a personal level, and it's quite rife.
I've heard of people leaving the industry because of it. And you could say on one hand, well, they should toughen up. It's a tough industry. Or you could say, really, is that the best we can do? There's talent and, wonderful creativity in each of us. We should be finding a way to pull that out.
Number 3, are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
Yes, I'm currently reading a book. I actually saw this gentleman speak in Cannes at it was a LinkedIn sort of Q&A, and his name is Will, and I'm not quite sure how to say his last name, Will Guardia. It's a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, and it is, he was a restaurateur behind 11 Madison Park.
Yes.
The number 1 restaurant in the world for many, many years, and he came to that business as a restaurateur versus a chef, and all the restaurants that were winning best restaurant in the world were all very celebrity chef driven or incredible chef driven. And this is his story around how he centered his entire business around providing not only amazing food, but an incredible experience and hospitality like no other. And what a gift it is to be able to bestow hospitality on people. And it's relevant to, I think, absolutely any business. It's certainly relevant to the agency world, which is very much a service business for its clients. But he just tells a really wonderful story, and I think there's a lot of inspiration to be found in that book. So, Unreasonable Hospitality.
Amazing. And do you read much outside of, kind of work related?
I have a tendency to overread in work. I hate to say it, I'm really embarrassed. I can't think of the last novel I read, and that's super embarrassing.
No, I don't think it's embarrassing. I mean, I'm the same. Although maybe I am embarrassed, actually. I feel like I should be. My wife is a prolific reader.
Yes.
And
those people that read a book a week, stuff like that. Oh my God, I don't know how they do it. I wish I could do it.
She's one of them. Okay, I don't think that book's come up before, actually. So that's a good one. So that link will be in the show notes. And number 4 then, Susan, is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest who has to give their reason why.
I would dedicate this episode to a woman named Marianne Bess, who was my boss back in the day at Team One, a boss and mentor, and she's seen me grow from being, a little account coordinator, assistant account executive, through my career, moving overseas. She's been a constant source of inspiration and guidance. We met up again in person, so we knew each other in Los Angeles. I moved from LA to Singapore, then to Sydney. She was in Sydney at that time. I think she was working at Saatchi & Saatchi at that time. She was such a model for me she was probably the best account person you could ever meet, by the way, an incredible role model. An incredible friend over the years, and she's going through a bit of a rough patch herself, and I would dedicate this to her to let her know how much she has meant to me, and to thank her for everything.
Amazing. That's a great dedication. Fantastic. So this episode is very, very happily dedicated to Marianne Bess. Perfect.
2 S's, Marianne Bess.
Marianne Best.
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks, Susan.
Oh, thank you, Giles.
So, as a final call to action, everything we've discussed, including the campaigns and the previous campaigns that we didn't really get the opportunity to dig into today, will be linked to in the show notes, as well as Unreasonable Hospitality. How else can our listeners get more Susan Coghill?
Assuming they want more Susan Coghill, they can follow me obviously on LinkedIn. I'm not really on Twitter, and I usually leave my socials pretty private, but definitely LinkedIn. I do a fair amount of talking here in Australia at industry events here. I will be in London for the Festival of Marketing. I'm doing a fireside chat with Mark Ritson. So if you happen to be in town and going to the conference, look me up and please come hear our chat.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Susan, and thank you for finding the time across time zones. I know that's easier said than done.
My pleasure,
but
Giles.
I've really, really enjoyed this.
Yes, thank you. So have I. Thank you so much for having me.
And finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the podcast. Keep your questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online, or email the mouthful, that is calltoaction@gasp.agency.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try. And I try, and I try, and I try.